What happens when you take your average compact luxury sedan, you increase the ride height by nearly 3 inches, add standard all-wheel drive? You get the 2016 Volvo S60 Cross Country. Volvo basically took the same formula that they used to create the XC70 and the V60 Cross Country, and they've applied it to a sedan instead of a wagon. Now, although this sounds a little bit crazy, this is almost the same thing that is going on with the brand new Mercedes-Benz GLC Coupe as well as the BMW X4, except they went about it a little bit differently. They took a crossover and then sedanified it, for lack of a better word. So that would be as if Volvo, instead of doing this with the S60, took the XC60, which is a crossover, and then they squashed the rear end to give it a more sedan-like profile. Instead of doing that, Volvo just took a sedan and jacked it up a few inches. Of course, the big change is the ride height, because what Volvo did was they took the S60 and they added about 2.5 inches to the ride height, giving this 7.9 inches. That's right around the same as you find in something like a Jeep Cherokee. We're only a fractions of an inch off. Now, if your eyes are telling you that something looks wrong from these angles, I have to admit that that's also what I saw the first time I saw the S60 Cross Country, because it is fairly tall for a sedan. There really haven't been many vehicles that have attempted this. We had the Subaru Sport Utility Sedan, and then we had the AMC Eagle, and neither one of them sold all that well. However, today we have an awful lot of vehicles that fall out of the mainstream forms. We have things like that BMW X4, the Mercedes-Benz GLC Coupe, the BMW X6, and a variety of other vehicles that have this same kind of sedan or coupe-like profile, but they're trying to be an SUV. Out back, we get basically the same look as the regular S60 sedan. We have these well-integrated exhaust tips right here, although we do have Cross Country stamped across the back right below the bumper cover. I would love to know what you think about the overall look of the S60 Cross Country, so be sure and let me know down there in the comment section down below. I have to admit, I am a little torn. I have actually owned Volvos in the past, both Volvo sedans and Volvo wagons, but I think that I am more of a Volvo wagon person than a jacked up Volvo sedan person myself. We lose a lot of the practicality that we would get in the V60 Cross Country. The V60 Cross Country has a relatively small back seat just like the S60, but it has a pretty big trunk. In theory, I am the target demographic for something like the S60 Cross Country, because I do live out here in the forest, off the beaten path, down a gravel road, and I do appreciate the all-wheel drive ability when winter comes around and that gravel road is a little slippy slidey. However, I do also commute about 60 miles one way to work, and I do like a vehicle that handles well on the winding mountain roads that I drive on. Under the hood, we find one of my favorite quirky engine designs. It is a 2.5-liter inline 5-cylinder turbocharged engine. Now, why 5 cylinders? The answer is actually fairly simple. 5 cylinders gives you a smoother engine than a 4-cylinder design, and it's actually a little bit more efficient and an awful lot shorter than a 6-cylinder engine design. Power comes in at 250 horsepower and 266 pound-feet of torque, although this engine will overboost that torque to 295 pound-feet for 10 seconds in gears 2 through 6. This engine is mated only to a 6-speed Aisin automatic transmission and a standard Haldex all-wheel drive. The Haldex all-wheel drive system can send up to 50% of the power to the rear wheels whenever it wants to, and if one of the front wheels slips, it can actually send about 90% of the power to the rear. It may surprise you to learn that towing capacity for the S60 Cross Country actually comes in at 3,500 pounds. Now, the reason for that is because European shoppers actually tow with their sedans and their wagons in Europe, although that is relatively unusual for America. So many European sedans like this actually have relatively healthy towing capacities compared to American sedans. Front seat comfort comes in at 9 out of 10 points. Volvo seats are extremely comfortable. However, we do not have 4-way adjustable lumbar support in this generation of the Volvos. We also have a tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion, but it's also manual. Now, I think that these seats are actually more comfortable than the seats you'll find in the BMW X3 or X4 or the Mercedes-Benz GLC, but it depends on your body shape, because these are not quite as adjustable as those other seats. So if you're shorter or much taller than me, then you may find these seats a little bit less comfortable than the BMW. Either way, the support is very good, and we also get relatively aggressive side bolsters on the seat back and seat bottom cushion. An area where the S60 has struggled versus the competition in the regular old sedan segment is rear seat accommodation, because you'll notice this front seat is adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, and I have about 2 inches left there. You will find more room in the BMW 3 Series or the Audi A4. I also have a relatively limited amount of headroom. Now, my hair is brushing the ceiling, but my head's not touching the ceiling like you do find in certain American mid-size sedans. So these rear seats are actually a little bit more comfortable than you'll find in something like a Chrysler 200 or a Ford Fusion. Now moving over to the middle seat, you will notice that the S60 is a relatively compact sedan because I don't have enough room to actually have my head upright in the back. Still, rear seat passengers get 3 headrests. We also get a softly padded center armrest with a bit of storage right there, and we get a split 60/40 folding seat back. They do fold from the trunk, however, not on the inside of the vehicle. Speaking of the trunk, this is one of the areas where the V60 Cross Country really excels over the S60 Cross Country. Because you'll notice I have one bag right here and it slides right out of the trunk. And that is because for the S60 Cross Country, they give us a compact spare tire. Remember, the S60 does not get one. The S60 Cross Country, however, does, but it takes up about 4 or 5 inches of your trunk volume. If we zoom in closer, you can see what's going on here. We have the sides of the trunk where the normal S60's trunk would be, and in the S60 Cross Country, we get this load floor that's raised up and just about level with the end of that trunk area. And that's because that's where the spare tire is located. Now, we do get some tiny storage wells on either side of that, but you do lose a considerable amount of space versus the regular S60. That means that when it comes to my exclusive trunk comfort index, I'm going to have to give this 6 out of 10 points. The S60's trunk comes across as very much a cargo slot because you'll notice that the opening right here is actually taller than it is deep in this dimension. So that means you really just have to insert your cargo right into the trunk. And with this load floor positioned the way that it is, we just get an awful lot less room than we get in the regular S60. We do, however, have a nice helper handle to help you close the trunk. As you'd expect, the interior is essentially shared with the S60 model, so we have height adjustable seat belts for both the driver and the front passenger, and fixed headrests. The only sports on offer inside are these relatively aggressively bolstered leather seats. Now, leather is not standard on the regular S60. The front doors are composed of largely soft touch plastic. We also have a leather insert right there, and our model has the optional wood trim. There's a small storage cubby at the bottom right next to the speaker. Now, you'll notice in the S60, like many compact crossover vehicles, that the B pillar in the car right there is basically right next to that seat, and that seat is not all the way back in its tracks. That means that if you have a larger driver, your elbow will end up somewhere right around here and won't actually be on this armrest on the door. The dashboard is this one-piece soft-touch injection molded plastic part, and then we have a large glove compartment right there below it. It has a small storage cubby right in the front, and then a very large storage well behind it, easily able to accommodate a tablet computer. This S60 has the up-level Harman Kardon audio system that is standard on the S60 Cross Country. Keyless Go is also standard, so this slot right here is only used if the battery in your key dies and you need to insert it so that way the car can read it anyway. We do have this standard navigation and infotainment screen. It is relatively small for the segment because this does not get Volvo's latest system that we see in the new XC90 yet. We have one large air vent right here, hazard light button, and a single optical disc player right below. Our model has the optional wood trim. Aluminum trim is standard. We have a lot of buttons going on here, and we'll move the shifter to drive so you can see the rest of them. This menu button and control knob controls that infotainment screen. You can also do that from the steering wheel as well. If you want to know more about this version of the Sensus infotainment system, go ahead and click that banner at the bottom of your screen. You'll be taken on over to that video about it. Power button, volume knob, sound button right there, and then we have some direct access buttons to the features over here. We also have this dial keypad that can be used to also search your iPad or other device inside. It can also be used for entering letters into the navigation system, etc., just like you would find on a regular telephone keypad. Below that, we have our standard dual zone climate control. At the bottom of the button bank, we have a camera button. This is for the standard backup camera or the optional front view camera if you have it so equipped. The button to recline the rear headrest so you can see out the back a little bit better. Heated steering wheel button, lane departure warning button right there. We also have a button that gives you information about how closely you're following the vehicle in front, parking sense enable disable button, and then hill descent control right over here. The hill descent control only works when you're in the manual mode, and you have to be buckled in, of course, as well in order for that to activate. The S60 uses a fairly typical console shifter. Drive is all the way down, sport is over to the left, and then you engage manual mode by clicking down for down and up for up. Below that, we have two very large cup holders. There is a roller cover to cover them up, and then we have a 12-volt power outlet right next to them. Behind that, we have a small, softly padded center armrest to reveal a relatively small storage cubby with a USB input and an auxiliary input inside. Over on the driver's side, we have a standard partial LCD instrument cluster, and there are a few different modes to this system, but overall the look doesn't change too heavily. You control the display via the turn signal stalk. There's a button and knob arrangement, and you can cycle through a few different themes. So right now that's the performance theme. We also have the eco theme, which gives you an eco guide on the left and then a tachometer on the right. And then we have the standard theme up here, which is the elegance theme, and that gives you a much more traditional look right there with the safety system display in the center. Then we have an engine temperature gauge right over here. You can cycle through the trip computer using that same knob on the turn signal stalk. And then we have the fuel gauge and the transmission mode indicator as LED displays right on the side of that. The steering wheel is the same wheel that we see in a variety of different Volvo models. It has aggressive sport grips on the bottom and right up here on the top of the steering wheel, and it's a almost 3-spoke arrangement. On the right side of the steering wheel, you find the volume up-down button, voice command button, and then the exit button and this knob actually control the Sensus infotainment system in the dashboard. The operation is basically the same as the button and knob arrangement in the dashboard. That allows you to actually control just about everything right here from the steering wheel. Dedicated track forward and backward buttons, and then on the left side of the steering wheel, we have the buttons for our standard radar cruise control system. When it comes to acceleration, I'm going to give the S60 Cross Country an A. We ran from 0 to 60 in about 6.5 seconds. Now you may be thinking that's a little bit slow for the category the S60 competes in, but this is the Cross Country, and in my mind this competes a little bit more with something like the X4. And the BMW X4 is right around the same time, 0 to 60. All cross-country models come with all-wheel drive standard, and that really does help the acceleration because it drastically improves the grip. Versus something like the S60 T6 front-wheel drive, you have an awful lot more wheel slip over there with that more powerful engine, but it will take you from 0 to 60 faster. When it comes to braking, I ran from 60 to 0 in 124 feet, which is actually pretty good for the segment as well. Now keep in mind we don't have terribly wide tires. Now it may sound odd because this car does have 235 with rubber on it, but these days 235 with tires are just about average in the luxury car segment. You don't get big tires until you're ending up at around 255 or so, and wider tires would definitely help the braking distance. Fade resistance is very good in this car, and the braking feel is very good as well. When it comes to handling, the S60 Cross Country does very well for itself. This is a very, very well sorted front-wheel drive chassis, easily the equal of the Mercedes-Benz CLA 250. Now keep in mind this is never going to handle like a perfectly balanced BMW or Mercedes that's rear-wheel drive because we have too much weight up front. But the difference is actually closer than you might think, especially when we start taking a look at things like the BMW X4, because this has a much lower center of gravity than the X4 or any other crossovers out there because it is based on a sedan. Volvo also chose to make this suspension quite firm. This is not the soft AMC Eagle or Subaru SUS that you remember from ages ago. This actually is a quite firm European-style vehicle, and it really shows in the suspension. Therefore, when it comes to the ride, I'm going to have to give this a B-. It is well sorted, but it's just a little too firm for my tastes. The logic behind the S60 Cross Country, of course, is that this is the kind of vehicle for you if you live down a gravel road or down a poorly maintained dirt road, something along those lines, but you still want a sedan, because this does have the ground clearance to be able to do that. It has the standard all-wheel drive as well, of course. The only problem with that is that on those roads, it is going to be fairly rough going. But then when you get out here on your favorite winding mountain road, the handling is absolutely excellent and definitely better than your average luxury crossover. Just like the regular S60, cabin noise is very well controlled, and I think this is actually quieter than your average compact luxury crossover as well. Now on the downside, fuel economy is definitely a little bit less exciting. I've been averaging 21.5 miles per gallon, which is right around what you should get in the S60 Cross Country. However, that is notably lower than you'll find in the BMW X4, even with all-wheel drive and their 4-cylinder engine. Now the performance in the X4 is also going to be fairly equal to this S60 Cross Country, and you can get an M Sport package over there in the BMW, which will make it handle a little bit better as well. The reason is twofold. Volvo is still using their older T5 5-cylinder engine family in this particular vehicle, and we of course are still getting the 6-speed automatic, and the 8-speed automatic is much more efficient. The most interesting thing about the S60 Cross Country is that this is not a floaty-boaty, wallowy type crossover sedan that I kind of expected. This is not like the XC70. The XC70 is much softer than this. This is more like the V60 Cross Country, which is also a raised-up wagon, except that Volvo actually made the suspension a little bit firmer even than certain versions of the regular V60. Pricing for the S60 Cross Country starts at $43,500, and there are almost no options available. That's because this comes almost fully loaded. Basically everything that you're seeing here is standard on the vehicle except for the wood trim that we have on the inside. That means we get the standard radar cruise control, which is excellent in the Volvo models. It is a full speed range system, will take you to a complete stop. We have the standard autonomous braking system with pedestrian detection in this vehicle. We also have standard parking sensors and a backup camera with navigation and iPod interface. Leather seating is also included in this model, and that is optional on the S60. Now when you add all of that up together, it means that the price difference between this and a comparable S60 is really only around $900 or so. Now pricing is honestly very tricky because we really only have vehicles like the V60 Cross Country to compare this to, the S60 sedan, and perhaps something like a BMW X4. Now Mercedes-Benz has announced a GLC coupe, but we don't have pricing information on that yet. Versus the S60 sedan, again, this gives you the extra ride height, the all-wheel drive system. It's no more capable than the all-wheel drive system in the S60, but we do get the increased ride height. When comparing this to the V60, obviously this is the sedan version and the other is the wagon version. So we're going to get a little bit more cargo area in the V60 Cross Country than we'll find in the S60 Cross Country. It does end up being more of a styling difference. BMW's X4 gives us a relatively similar look. However, it is a hatchback, and I think that if this had been converted into a hatchback, it would make the S60 a little bit more practical, because then you could use some of this extra room right here that we don't get to use in the S60. The X4 is a little bit more practical on the inside as well. We get a little bit more rear seat legroom, although it is still fairly compact back there in the rear seats. And the cargo area is of course smaller than the X3, but it is bigger than what we get here in the S60 Cross Country. Now, comparably equipped, the X4 is going to be considerably more expensive because it already starts a little bit more than this and doesn't have nearly the same kind of feature content we get in the S60 Cross Country. So this will give you relatively similar style for significantly less money. We're talking about $8,000 less. Now, at this time, we haven't been told what the Mercedes GLC Coupe will be priced at, but you can bet that it will probably be a few $1,000s more expensive starting than the S60, and it also won't have the same kind of feature content we get in the base S60 either. Now, the reality for me is that I actually owned a Volvo V70R, which is actually the Volvo wagon that is lowered, not raised. And I drove just fine on the roads that I live on. So the theory that I need a off-road type vehicle like this for my lifestyle just doesn't ring true for me. And that means that if I were in this particular situation deciding between this and the S60, I would probably take the S60, and I would take the S60 with the turbocharged and supercharged engine and front-wheel drive. Because all-wheel drive, although it is handy, I do like the extra power and the extra fuel economy that you get in that S60. Fuel economy really is the only downside to this particular model, because fuel economy is lower than you'll find in the X4. Although Volvo's 5-cylinder engine is smoother and it has a more pleasing exhaust note to my ear than a 4-cylinder engine, this is thirstier than the competition and thirstier than Volvo's new engine families. My bottom line with the S60 is that this ends up being a very pragmatic answer to the crossover question in the United States. However, a lot of people don't really go for the pragmatic option, to be honest. This vehicle handles better, and I think that it has a better ride than many crossovers out there. The ride is actually comfortable without being too floaty-boaty, but we still get excellent handling. Better handling than you'll find in something like your BMW X3 even, or a Mercedes-Benz GLC, because the weight is simply closer to the ground. The S60 Cross Country is also light for a compact luxury crossover, and the cabin is fairly quiet as well. However, on the downside, in order to get this form, you do have to give up a decent amount of cargo practicality that you do find in something like that V60 Cross Country. Also, the fuel economy, while good for a crossover, is not as good as I would like it to be, and it's definitely not as high as you'll find in certain versions of the BMW 3 Series with all-wheel drive. Be sure and let me know what you think about the S60 Cross Country down there in the comments section down below. I admit that I'm overall very torn about this vehicle, but it honestly comes across as the answer to the question that very few people have been asking. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.